Today I'm going to make a lid for this shrink pot that I made a couple of weeks ago. This shrink pot has thoroughly dried, and in the process of drying it shrank around the bottom here to lock the bottom into place. Today it's time to make a lid. I'm going to make a two-piece lid for this particular shrink pot. So let's see how we do that. To begin the shrink pot, I had to select a piece of wood, and today I selected a piece of paulownia. I had this piece in the shop here for some time. It was lying around, but it's also very dry. It's a nice piece of wood. Previously I used part of this tree to turn some bowls. Very interesting bowls, by the way. But today we're making a shrink pot lid. So I began by hand planing the surface of the board. After I hand planed it, I ripped off a nice thin section, about a ½ inch thick, to create my lid. Let's take a look at a finished shrink pot with a very similar type of lid to what we're creating today. This lid is actually made from two pieces. We have an inset and the top of the lid. The inset sets down inside of the shrink pot like so. That's what we're trying to do today. I'm just finishing up drawing, or tracing I should say, the outer profile of this shrink pot onto this board, which will be cut out and become the lid. If you notice, I have registration marks on the pot and the lid part itself. So there's a little circle on one edge of the pot, and there's a corresponding little circle on part of the lid. There's also a hash mark and a hash mark on the lid as well. So let's take a look at all the parts that we have here for this lid. This is going to be the lid, the top part of the lid. There's another part that's going to be on the bottom part of the lid, and that is the inset. I have a little triangle there, and I have a corresponding triangle there, because these two pieces are going to get glued together there. So here's the shrink pot, and here is the inset board. I have a ring drawn on the inset board which corresponds to the inner ring of the shrink pot. The question is, how did I get that inner ring drawn onto my inset? I can't trace it because I can't get into the pot because there's a bottom. So here's what I do. A couple ways to do this. One way is to have tracing paper. If you have a piece of tracing paper, you can simply put that on the pot and very carefully draw your ring through the tracing paper. So that's one way to do it. What if you don't have tracing paper though? There's another technique. I have some shop rags which form a nice padded surface. I put my piece of paper on the shop rags and I put the pot on top of that, and I press down and give it a little bit of a turn. Rock it back and forth, rock it round and round. When I do that, what I'm left with is an impression of the shrink pot on the piece of tracing paper. So we have an inner ring and an outer ring on this piece of paper. Now I can simply go back to the bench, take a pencil, and carefully draw the inner ring, tracing over the inner ring. So I've already done that on this piece of paper here. So I have this, and what I did was I have some registration marks on there as well. So I traced it. Now, how do I get that ring from there onto my board? I flip the ring over, and I take a soft pencil and I scribble all on the other side of that line. I scribble and scribble and scribble. What I'm basically doing is creating a transfer paper. So in other words, I put that on the lid just like that. I should say the inset, and then I press hard with my pencil, and I press hard, and what it does is it's like acting like carbon paper. I'm transferring the line from one to the other. What I can do is lift the paper up to see how I'm doing, and I can see the line being traced onto the lid. Okay, so that's how I transfer. It's called the double transfer method. So now I have my shrink pot and I have my inset here, and the inset matches the shrink pot just like that. Now all I need to do is cut out the inset, cut out my lid, and put them together. Now I have my two pieces for my lid cut out. Triangle corresponds to the glue sides, so these two sides will be glued together. I have my outlines drawn on there. I have my registration marks. Now what I need to do is I need to get this inset to fit inside of this little shrink pot. This is the side that gets glued, so that will be on top. That's how this shrink pot's going to go together, just like that. Okay. But now I got to get this thing to inset in there. Now here's what I do. Take a piece of double stick tape and I'll put that right there for now. Put it down. Peel the backing off. And I have a little block of wood that I'm going to glue or tape right to that piece right there. That's so when I get this thing fitting on the inside of this pot, it will be difficult to get it back out once I get it to slide down in the pot. So that's why I put the little double stick tape with my little block of wood there. I'm going to use some sandpaper. I'm going to sand this thing to get it to fit as closely as I can. I want a nice fit. I want it to be actually a little bit loose. I don't want it to fit so tight because the shrink pot will shrink up and down a little bit, or in and out I should say, through the seasons. So we don't want to fit it too tight because in the humid weather it would bind up. I like to use a sanding block to sand down to this line here on this inset. This wood is very soft and it will only take a few minutes to sand it down right to the line. Once I get it sanded down to the line, I'll start test fitting it to see how well it'll fit. Set it down. See where you have some gaps. I have a couple small places holding me up here just a little bit. We're almost there. I always have to be careful of those registration marks, or I should say be aware of the registration marks. Look at that, just about fitting in there. Now that I have the inset fit to the shrink pot, I'm going to glue that on to the bottom of the lid. The two triangles were my markers, so I could keep it straight, which side gets glued to which. So let's do that right now. We don't need a lot of glue for this. I have a registration mark there and a corresponding registration mark there. I also have my circle right there and my circle right there. Now this lid was cut oversize, so the precise placement isn't quite as important. I just want to center it more or less in the circles that I have drawn there. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to use a spring clamp. Now we'll let that sit for 15 or 20 minutes before we proceed. Well, here we have it. The shrink pot with the lid on. Has the inset on the bottom of the lid, which sits right down into the shrink pot. All I need to do is carve the lid, and then I'll be finished. Well, there we have it. This shrink pot is finished. It took about an hour to carve this lid. This paulownia is a pretty soft wood, but like I said, it takes detail very well. Let's take a look at this shrink pot for a minute. So you can see I have the shrink pot with the lid, inset, there we go. Inset is the same wood as we used for the top of it, so it all looks like one piece. And this particular shrink pot, I made it so that the lid is over the shrink pot, and that's a nice low look, kind of looks like a mushroom or something like that. So there you go, shrink pot lid. It was a lot of steps to complete this little shrink pot lid. In fact, a lot of steps to create that shrink pot. But there you are, we're finished, and we'll see you next time.